In a wonderful episode of The Simpsons, Krusty the Clown finds out he is not really Jewish. His retort is priceless and says quite a bit about the hypocrisy and ridiculous notions we have about modern religious sects.
Krusty, what's wrong?
I just found out I'm not Jewish. Oh, I was turned down by all those country clubs for nothing.
Well, you're still my hero.
So what? Everything's changed. I thought I was a self-hating Jew, but it turns out I'm just a plain old anti-Semite.
We have so much to discuss.
Ugh.
Why is it that if I despise Christianity, I'm just a heretic? If I despise Islam, I'm just an infidel. But if I despise Judaism, I'm an anti-Semite racist. Must I be a racist just because I don't subscribe to an archaic religious belief and a bunch of myths about a people chosen specifically by God? I'll explain in a minute. I'm Harry Tick from DinosaurSaddles.com, and we don't care what religious views we expose as hypocritical. The bad news for us skeptics is that it is very hard to separate being a Jew and Judaism. It's really the only religion that is completely associated with a specific race of people. And even this isn't all that accurate a statement, as there are some pretty large racial differences between different types of Jews. Ethiopian Jews have very dark skin in line with other African races. Ashkenazi Jews, the Jews from Northern Europe, have very light skin. Considering the supposed fact that all Jews originated from one man and one woman, these differences seem to make a pretty good case for the evolutionary process. But that's a discussion for another time. If you are going to be critical of Judaic beliefs, then you'll need to be prepared to be labeled an anti-Semite. This is plain and simple a political tactic by Jews. It's very convenient to be able to label all of your critics as racists and make it stick. Even the term anti-Semitic is basically incorrect. Semitic essentially refers to language differences in the region. But I don't really think that's all that important. Suffice it to say that Jews have built up an entire industry designed on capitalizing on the historical guilt over the Holocaust in order to use it to further their political aims. If you are interested in how sophisticated this Holocaust industry is, you can read Professor Norman Finkelstein's book on the subject. For me, frankly, this is a non-issue. I don't give a damn about the terminology used in the debate, nor do I care about the accuracy of the labels. As we dissect the issue, we'll see how this semantic facade is just window dressing, concealing the real issues in the debate. Current anti-Jewish sentiment has three basic origins, and this is where the meat of the debate lies. First, there is the Christian anti-Jew tradition. The Jews killed Christ, and the Jews refused to accept that Jesus is the Messiah. Therefore, we should hate Jews. Next, there is the regional anti-Jew tradition. When the Jews were sent packing out of Palestine after their failed revolt against the Romans, they moved into other regions and lived as sort of a minority pocket inside these other regions, which later became nation-states. These little pockets of Jews often drew the hatred of their host country, and in many cases throughout history they have been subject to discrimination, further evacuation, and even genocide. Finally, there is the anti-Zionist view, which is almost entirely a political anti-Jew viewpoint, namely that Jews moving back to Palestine have displaced the indigenous Arab population and disenfranchised the Palestinian Arabs. This last one, the anti-Zionist perspective, is the one garnering most of the headlines today because of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but the roots of anti-Jewish sentiment rests with the first two, which, for brevity purposes, will combine into one: non-Christians of a different race living in small pockets inside of Christian populations. This anti-Jewish sentiment developed not from anything the Jews actually did. In fact, they mainly just tried to live their lives and maintain some semblance of their own culture and tradition. The anti-Jewish sentiment arose because of the ineptness of Christian culture, ineffectual Christian politics, and the archaic Christian belief system. If it weren't for the Christians' total lack of confidence, the Jews would never have been ostracized and displaced, and frequently massacred. The basic fact of history is that Christianity, left to its own designs, produced almost nothing. The only tangible byproduct of 1,000 years of total Christian rule in Europe are some cathedrals that remain standing. Most of the roads used in Europe up until the present were roads originally built by the Romans. It is sort of a common tradition to praise the ability of the Romans to have made roads that endured so long. But as noted author William Manchester pointed out in his wonderful book about the Renaissance, the Roman roads are not really a testament to the greatness of Roman builders, but rather a testament to the ineptness of medieval Christians and the fact they couldn't build anything better. Medieval Christians basically took all of the progress and knowledge of the previous 1,000 years and threw it in the garbage, instead substituting their own primitive superstitions and half-baked biblical interpretation in place of all that knowledge. True civilization and the modern economy as we understand it today didn't really take off until secular authorities supplanted the church as the primary instrument of civilization. But what has become a continuing theme throughout history, each time there was an economic or social downturn, there was an increase in anti-Jewish sentiment and a rise in violence against the Jews. This now brings us to the modern era, with the Jews settled back in Palestine. We also have a new construct in international politics, one that never existed before, namely the concept of international law and the United Nations. Underlying power politics has not really changed much, but now there is a shell covering everything up and trying to pretend might no longer makes right. Of course, the politics of the Middle East is still governed by armies. Jerusalem is controlled by the army with the most strength, just as it was in Persian times, Greek times, Roman times, the Crusade times, and every other time in history. The only difference is that now we must pretend that we're making everything legal, and this is where all the semantics and labels come into play. Jews now use the one tool in their semantic bag to maintain what their armies already hold, namely guilt. Anyone who grew up with a Jewish mother, like I did, knows how well they play the guilt card. This is essentially the counter to the legal claims in international law. Jews calculate, and rightly so, that as long as guilt over what was done to the Jews is stronger than the guilt over what is being done to the Palestinian Arabs, they'll avoid any punitive measures regarding the policies of the Israeli state. Of course, this has the effect of wearing thin on many people who weren't born in the 1940s, had nothing to do with the Holocaust, and really don't want to be guilted for the past sins. Consequently, what we call anti-Semitism now has two components. The first is the traditional one that never really disappeared. Lower-class Christians who believe their status in life is the result of Jewish trickery. This played well in the Middle Ages and continues to play well today. The second form is basically a backlash against this guilt trip. Jews have their homeland. In Christian countries, they are not being killed or ghettoized any longer. They are pretty much afforded all the rights of everyone else in the Christian countries they now live. So why should we have to listen to them whine? All of this is an unfortunate byproduct of an idiotic construct called international law, and its mouthpiece the United Nations. If we follow the same international law that is being thrown at Israel, then the United States must give back its territory to the Indians and Mexico. Half the European borders need to be redrawn, and Little Tibet will get back its independence. Many non-believers just want to critique the archaic and primitive religion called Judaism. I'm not a racist. I don't dislike Jews as a people. Hell, I am a Jew. I just think the biblical views they believe have been thoroughly disproved by factual evidence. Can I hold these views separate from any political opinion I may have? Thanks to the media age and lawyers trying to govern international politics, you can't. I'm Harry Tick at DinosaurSaddles.com, where we treat religion with all the respect it deserves. Little to none.